What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and for the past few days I've been enjoying my time with Final Fantasy XVI. The world building, music, and combat have kept me glued to my seat, and I'm currently around halfway through the story and enjoying it immensely. But amidst the hype, there's been this growing controversy surrounding the latest game in the series, which is how 16 apparently fails women as a demographic and its use of slavery being tone deaf. I of course don't agree with either of these sentiments, but I do think it's very important we discuss these topics in entertainment as long as they service the story, instead of to pander like so many things do these days. Recently, one of the most tone-deaf websites around, thegamer.com, decided to throw their hat into the ring with this article titled, "We Need to Talk About Slavery in Final Fantasy XVI." The article starts by immediately tying slavery in human history to the battle on diversity and inclusion of today, which makes this article already off to a really bad start. I'll let the gamers say their piece before I rip into them, and I quote, "While it's largely abolished in our own society, the act of ruling over a lower class and forcing them to work remains a common trope in the media we consume. Fantasy especially explores the disgusting careers of slavers and the struggles of those beneath them. But exploring these stories can't help but bring with them real-world parallels as we continue to reconcile with our own history. Final Fantasy XVI made headlines ahead of its release for how white it is. The majority of its cast are attractive white men and women with regional British accents. Clive, Jill, and Sid are all seemingly designed to pass as both white and Asian. But all of them are drawn into storylines concerning slavery that continually fail to consider the color of their skin. Producer Naoki Yoshida said that the game aims to be a fairly accurate rendition of classic Western fantasy, which in literature like The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones is whiter than vanilla ice cream. Such outdated views on the genre are damaging, frequently used by right-leaning creators to justify the bigotry of their own creations. But Final Fantasy is a global hit, and it shouldn't take such a narrow view of the world. Diversity is a big issue, and Square's excuses feel like lightweight justification for a damning lack of diversity. Slavery in particular is handled very poorly. It's hard to watch, but almost becomes heartwarming in its ham-fistedness. At the same time, there are several instances where slaves are liberated across regions, but it doesn't seem that society is shifting into a new status quo, even as the magic they continue to rely on dwindles. Slaves are displaced and have nowhere to go unless we assist them, and it feels even more hurtful to suggest that slaves are powerless to enact change on their own destiny. This liberation should have been a main drive of the core narrative instead of a tertiary discussion. Final Fantasy XVI wants to be an epic anime adventure on the one hand, while on the other it seems determined to explore powerful issues like slavery and doesn't do them justice. Tie in the game's own lack of diversity and we only complicate matters further. Final Fantasy XVI moves the series forward in a lot of ways, and that includes approaching emotional complexity in its storytelling. Deciding to tackle issues like slavery is undoubtedly a part of that, and it's mostly powerful in its execution. Yet it's also a heavy-handed exploration of the idea that discounts our own history for a fantasy clone that is desperate to talk up big ideas without enough appropriate world building to uphold it." End quote. Okay, there's so much to unpack here, so I'll just go step by step to save myself from going crazy if you don't mind. The first part where thegamer.com really loses the plot is where they tie white people as an ethnicity exclusively to the exploitation of slavery in the world, which is completely wrong if you know anything about history and how the world works. Largely speaking, while white people did enslave other races, so did every other race on planet Earth as well. I've talked about The Woman King in the past, which was a woke revisionist history movie that painted a slave nation as heroes for social justice points. But the reality was that the real history behind that movie was about a nation that built its fortunes by enslaving other black people in massive human trafficking trades for profit. Then of course you have other real-life examples as well. My ethnicity is Serbian and Armenian, two nationalities that have had their cultural histories directly tied to being enslaved and subjugated by larger powers, like the Ottoman Empire for example. The bitter truth that places like The Gamer and other left-leaning biased websites fail to understand is that humanity at its core will and always has been a greedy, prideful race that thrives off the suffering of those beneath them. To act surprised when the majority of the world and its history doesn't look like a Disney movie or respect things like your pronouns proves that these modern journalists and their clear, confused biases. Final Fantasy XVI has a very big emphasis on slavery, and it makes it very clear that this exploitation of human life is not limited to or cares about the color of skin. In a lot of ways, 16's realm of Valisthea is like the Woman King's real history. It's a nation that profits off its own people and cares little that those they subjugate look like they do. Slavery as a concept will always unfortunately be relevant because it's very easy for people in privileged positions, regardless of ethnicity, to enact their superiority in any situation where they have power. Think of any time you've been in a restaurant and see someone abuse the staff over something minor, or a customer attacking a store cashier for a mistake. These are all small indications of people who, regardless of their skin, show that humanity is indeed greedy and brutal, even in civilized society. The fact 16's depiction of slavery makes you uncomfortable is the point, it's supposed to. And as of the whole Valisthea being very white, which I already covered a few days back in a previous video, makes the racism and injustice of those within 16's world even more brutal in my opinion. It would have been really easy for Square Enix to make all the bearers as black people and have the ruling class be white, because that distinction would allow these libtard morons an easy avenue to understand the differences and it would validate their woke mindsets. But I think it's far more interesting and actually even more dehumanizing that Valisthea's slaves look just like their masters, because it makes the concept of slavery go beyond the skin color that is often so easily abused by writers to impose lazy, good versus bad scenarios. But instead, by making them all look the same, it shows that even in a society where they all look alike, these people have been conditioned to see each other not as good or bad, but human and tools. Clive, of course, is one of these slaves, and his mark immediately delegates him to being treated as subhuman. And it makes for some really interesting moments in the story, especially in side quests where these vapid citizens become power hungry. And it creates a dichotomy between the bearers or slaves and their masters. In a lot of ways, 16's themes remind me of another game called Tales of Arise, which is a really great game. You should definitely play it, and in that one, Alphen is a lot like Clive. They're slaves who rebel against society against those who are socially uplifted above them. And like I've said already, the fact they look alike makes it even more damning and it blurs the lines beyond typical means. The Gamer also says that right-wing writers often use slavery to justify their own bigotries, which I think is just wrong to say as well. Literary works like Game of Thrones or other games like Tales of Arise prove that racism is not simply tied to the color of your skin. It's a systemic mind virus that twists people into believing they're simply better than others because of societal constructs. This bigotry can be revealed in many ways. It could simply be a white person calling a black person a slur. And it can also be a black person saying you can't be racist against white people because of their privilege, which is inherently racist itself no matter how you spin it. The Gamer also says that 16's lack of diversity is disappointing, but like Naoki Yoshida already confirmed months ago, the story takes place within a closed-off continent, far away from the happenings of the rest of the world. Basically, imagine that 16's world is like Australia, I guess. It's a continent that exists far away from many other places, but it of course has its own society, tensions, and history. Valisthea is basically Australia if the entire continent was governed and settled by Europe, basically, like in its totality and nothing else. They would have no concept of what the outside world would be like since there's plenty of problems already in their limited vicinity. After all, a big part of 16's plot is the kingdoms fighting because of dwindling resources. The final part of the Gamer's rant there also makes no sense where they say 16 suffers from a lack of world building, which for anyone who's played it, this is easily one of the most in-depth worlds Square has made yet. The amount of political intrigue and crisscrossing of relationships and history is literally Game of Thrones levels of complexity, and it's great because of that. Slavery will always be bad, of course, but it's not handled poorly at all in my opinion. It's easily one of the most interesting parts of 16's world by far, because it shows how awful humans are to one another when they have any modicum of power over each other. And I hate to get political, but if you wanted another real-life parallel, look at how recent times treated people that took the vax over those who didn't. People were ostracized, and many, like in Australia, were forced into camps because of unvaccination. And the media was pushing a pro-vax narrative and claimed anyone who didn't get it should lose their jobs and have their lives ruined. All I'm saying is that slavery and bigotry aren't only tied to concepts like skin color. Sometimes it's even things like getting jabbed, which, look, I hate talking about that particular stuff, but you can't deny the parallels. And comparing how the world viewed unvaxxed people from 2021 to now is like night and day. The fact I could work in a restaurant during that time period, but wasn't allowed to eat in the very same restaurant I worked in because of my vax status, well, I'm just saying it kind of proves my point that people having power over others is not limited to simply skin color or money. So I don't think Final Fantasy XVI has a slavery problem, but that thegamer.com and people like them have a problem that its depiction of slavery is far more nuanced and sadly relevant to today's times than what they've been conditioned to believe or understand. But really, what can I expect from a site that also recently pushed an article saying 16 doesn't allow its women to be powerful? In that article, written by the same person as a slavery one, they claim women aren't allowed to show they're amazing, which I also disagree. A major part of why 16 works so well from its story and characters is because no one is given preferential treatment based on what's between their legs. This article claims characters like Benedicta and Jill are held back because they're women. But I think the world of Valisthea is an uncaring one that swallows everyone whole regardless of gender. And it's also ironic to say two women who are literally dominants are somehow weak, when they have the power to level cities at a whim. But like the slavery angle I spoke about before confirms, it's not the power these people hold within them that determines how they're viewed, but the laws of society instead. Don't worry about spoilers here, but obviously Jill is the dominant of Shiva. I mean, it's been in so many trailers, I'm not really spoiling that by saying it. But what I love about 16's story is that even characters like Jill or even Clive with his power of Ifrit are seen more as monsters than people. I love the fact nobody in this game's world feels like Mary Sue's or they get praised for simply existing. The gamer is mad because they've been brainwashed by Western media to believe that every woman should be strong and have no flaws. And the sight of real actual female characters with good writing behind them like Benedicta or Jill makes their liberal brains shut down in confusion. They're so used to boring female representation like Rey or Captain Marvel that their brains can't accept well-written characters like Benedicta, for example. Because, hate to break it to the gamer, but women can be awful too. I know, crazy of me to say, but it's true. It's almost as if women and men are both capable of horrible acts of violence and indecency, and that regardless of their gender, people can be awful and despicable, which goes against the cookie-cutter writing of Western stories these days. Personally, I'll take a Jill or Benedicta over a Rey Palpatine any day, because at least I sympathize and understand them. I can't relate to someone who has no flaws. And I want to end this video by just saying that I love how Final Fantasy XVI depicts both men and women as strong and capable, and also depicts both genders as conniving and horrible as well. The world of Valisthea and its many moving parts go directly against the concepts that woke Western stories have been pushing for years now. It doesn't surprise me that a multi-layered world that doesn't display its themes or characters like boring labels confuses places like the gamer and others. And it's no surprise to me that Final Fantasy XVI is a global phenomenon and a massive success as well. Because this, my friends, is what a video game should be. This is what stories and characters can be, and I don't mean they should all be white, but they should be judged and examined for the things beyond their physical appearances. Because like slavery and the bigotry that's attached to it, or the powerful women of Valisthea who are victims of a world that fears them, Final Fantasy XVI is a captivating adventure about the deepest shades of gray and the morality that drowns in that madness. So thank you for watching as always, subscribe for more and like the video to help the channel out. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.